morning everyone. We're going to be doing a kind of abstract bird. It's quite a light, gentle tuition into the world of abstraction. You could go much further, but it's a nice little baby set project. Of course, let me just run through the materials you're going to need. First of all, a reference image. This is a fantastic royalty-free image from Pexels. Link is below. It's gorgeous. You can work with any theme, any animal you like, but birds are particularly good for something like this because there's so much movement. It gives you the opportunity to play around with the form and structure. Then you're going to need some paper. So you can see here I've got cartridge paper. This is 240 GSM. If you wanted to do this in oils, then you would need to prime it with gesso. So it's up to you. You could use acrylic paper, you could use oil paper. It's completely your call. But be prepared because you've got quite a big background coverage you've got to get, so it is going to get a bit wet, and if you haven't got a decent quality paper, it will cockle a bit. So consider that. You're going to need a charcoal pencil to get your drawing stage done, and probably a putty rubber as well to erase any of those errors, which is only natural in this type of technique. Then you're going to need some paint brushes. I've used just a few today. I haven't used that many as a greater range. I quite like a flat-headed brush. It'll give a much more abstract feel to the type of painting marks that you can generate. But it's up to you if you want to go for more of a pointed head. You're going to need a container with some clean water. You're also going to need some acrylic paints or some oil paints and a palette. I do go through the colours as we get started in, but if you want them now, you've got Mars Black, Titanium White, Cerulean Blue, Cobalt Blue, Ultramarine Blue, Lemon Yellow, Cadmium Red, Crimson Red. And that should be pretty much everything. Oh, a tissue, just to clean your brush in between and stop any cross-contamination. So, without much ado, let's get on with it. Let's start with drawing. Right, so the first thing you've got to do is get the drawing down. Now I've printed off my image here, and it's much more easier to have it in a physical form. You might be able to see I've gone over it with some charcoal, and I was just kind of playing around with the image, thinking about the bird and how the wings work, how far forward they move on the animal, how far back, and when they're beating, the direction they go at. So with something like this, it looks like the wings are forward in a maximum position. They might be able to go a little bit further, but they're quite, you know, underneath the head, they're quite forward in the position of the body. So a lot of the time, with something, if we're looking at making it look as if it's moving, we're going to be bringing the wings back and giving them more layered wings. We've also got to look at the direction that the animal is travelling. With this, you can see that the kingfisher is moving forward because of the aerodynamic shape of the body. So again, I can look at bringing the beak back, bringing the body back, and really dramatising that idea of forward propulsion in the artwork. Now, when you're abstracting an image, like we're going to be doing today, there are no rules. It's about you playing and finding things that work for you and optically that you find pleasing. That's the difficulty with abstract. It's, you know, a lot easier to teach a subject where if you do this and you do that, you'll get this. But that's not the case with abstract. Abstract is much more a playful technique, and that you develop a natural instinct for it over a period of time. So, first things first, how are we going to do it with this bird? Now, I've got a piece of printer paper that I've just put over the top of my drawing to show you how I've broken down the image, and I'm going to do it in a marker pen so that it's really nice and clear. I would recommend that you work in a nice sharp charcoal pencil on your piece of paper, okay? So first things first, we've got to get the basic shape of the animal down onto the piece of paper. To do this, the easiest way of working is generally like ovals, triangles, lines. Okay, so first of all, you can see here that we've got this oval for the head. So we're going to get an oval for the head. We've got an oval for the body. We've got kind of a triangular shape here and a triangular shape here for the beak. Now the beak on this bird is really large, and a lot of the time with birds the beaks are much larger than you actually think they are because they go so far back. Can you see how this sits underneath the start of the eye? But if we're just coming into the head, you could take a measurement. As you can see, I'm doing it with my fingers. I'm pulling it back and I'm looking at seeing the whole beak is fundamentally the same size as the skull of the bird. So I do have to keep that in mind when I'm starting to draw this out. Now with the wings, you can see that lovely triangular shape. You could break that down into an oval for the section of wing, and then much more of an arch for that section if you want to. So let's put it into practice, shall we? First of all, you're going to need to be holding towards the end so that you're moving much more from your elbow and your shoulder and getting the head position in. Now remember that you've got to work the whole piece of paper. I'm using an A3 piece of paper here. If you're on something smaller, just keep it in mind of where you want to start the head, because you don't want to fall off the left hand side of the piece of paper with the tail, especially if we're going to make it look like it's moving. So first things first, let's get that head oval in. Okay, so we've got an oval there. Then we're going to create an oval for the body. Okay, then we've got our triangle for our tail. Now we're looking at triangle for our beak, and also when you're doing this, just be aware of how high up this beak is compared to the tail. You see that the tail is sitting slightly lower than the beak, so do keep that in mind. You might find that you need to lift up your beak. Now with the beak, it's easy to get the line in between and then give yourself a triangle. Now, doesn't that look just like a kingfisher? Okay, now the next stage, like I said, is this wing. So with the wing, you could do it in two different sections. You could do a smaller section and build up if you're a little bit nervous, or if you're quite bold and confident, you can go in straight for the triangle. So let's get that wing shape in first. Okay, so that's that section of blue feathers there. Then get in the front of that wing, and I'm looking at how this sits just beneath the beak. So can you see where the beak's coming in? It gives me roughly the angle. Okay, then I've got that coming back like that into the rest of it. And can you see that kingfisher? It's already developed. So once you've got your basic shape like this, then you're looking at joining everything up, sliding your hand down and creating far more of a bird-like shape. Okay, so let's bring that up here. Let's bring that down here. We've got a little bit of body, so it slopes down to the tail, and that comes in here. We've got a little bit more shorter section in here, and this is going to be feathers, so let's just throw in a few feather lines. And then we've got that shape for the wing that's coming down on front of the animal. We've also got the wing coming down on the other side, and you don't get to see as much of that. So can you see how we've built that up straight away into the bird silhouette fundamentally? Then we're looking at getting a little bit more detail in before we abstract it. It's good to have the most bare bones you can get and then play around with the shapes and see where your imagination leads you. So let's bring that beak in, because then that gives us the position of the eye. Okay, and look at negative space. Can you see that space above and below? Okay, we've got that beak coming in here, coming up that around there. So the bit on the bottom of the beak is actually smaller, so let's bring that in. Let's bring that head section over there. Then we've got the section of orange coming down and that lovely flick of white. Like so. So you can see the orange section that's sitting underneath the eye. You've got an orange section sitting above the beak. Okay, we've got probably a little bit of white, which is in that bit, and we've got an orange belly just tucking underneath that. Then we're going to come back. We've got some feathers that are going to be sitting in here, feathers in here roughly, and when we can see that orange belly poking out underneath the wing and disappearing into the tail. Then we've got some feathers, and you know, you can simplify like I'm doing here, or you can make it more realistic. Completely up to you. Remember, this is about abstraction. First of all, we're drawing it, then we're going to pull it apart, and a lot of famous artists did this. It's a natural process of drawing whereby you work things up to a certain level, and then you start pulling out sections that you don't like and editing in and adding in extra ones that you do like. So first of all, we've got our bird shape there. Now we need to start abstracting it. So if I get a different colour, bear with me. Right, so if I use a red pastel, I'll show you how to abstract this image. And like I said, this is completely about you playing around and finding what works for you. First of all, I would deal with the areas that are moving. So we know kind of this body is moving this way, these wings are moving up and down that way. We've got to kind of go either along that way, or we've got to make these wings look like they're moving, okay? Or abstract, remember abstract is all about, you know, taking information, editing it, pretty much any form of art. You just get it on a larger scale for when it becomes more distorted that you can't tell what it is. Okay, so let's get these wings. So first of all, I can get that shape, and if I keep the black, so if I go over the bits that I'm keeping, I'm going to have that wing moving. Okay, so I can have some different lines there. Then I've got a feather coming out of here, and I've got a feather coming around here. Okay, I've also got these feathers coming down here, so I can start looking at bringing those in. And remember, I've got that same wing, so think about the position, use your imagination and your knowledge of the bird as the feathers would move. There you go, on that section. I've got this one, so I'm going to have that coming out here. And I'm going to throw in a few more as that would move. Now I'm going to keep his belly, his red belly as it comes up, and into the beak. I love this flowing shape. I also really like this flick of white. You can see that flick of white? As it comes up into the face, it kind of circles through, and then if we look at the eye shape, over that. Now I could bring the eye back again, because the idea of it moving, to exaggerate that shape, I could have an eye sitting there, and that means then I could get another flick over the top. So it's kind of multiple layers. Obviously this would affect the beak as well, because you've got to think about, you know, everything moving forward. So I'm putting in a little bit of a start of a beak there, and then the head shape coming down. Then I've got the top of the body, like so, and I might end up with a few lines in here to exaggerate that. And I've got this calming down into the tail. Now I might end up with like a little bit more of a tail being dragged behind, so multiple tail layers. So if you're layering footage of one photograph over another. Then let's bring in some of these wing details. Let's bring in some of this. Let's bring out another beak, which means we're going to need to bring out a head, because obviously the beak is linked to the head. And can you see how we've abstracted that? Now it's not heavily abstracted, it's enough that it looks quirky and imaginative, but you can still see that it's a bird in flight. You could abstract it far more, you could layer up lots of different lines and play around with it and really take it to a whole different level, or you can simplify it back. It's completely up to you. Like I said, there's no perfect recipe for this. It's about you finding what works visually for your own preference. It's all completely subjective. Right, so once you've got your drawing down, which should be in a nice charcoal pencil, not in a red oil pastel like I'm doing at this stage, we're going to move into the painting. I'll see you in a moment. Right, so here's my one that I've done. Obviously mine's a bit different because, you know, I was just playing around and showing you there a different approach. Once you've drawn it in charcoal, and you can see this is drawn in charcoal, you then need to get a tissue and you need to go over all your lines to take off the excess charcoal so that it doesn't cross-contaminate your paint. If you're working in oils, obviously your surface would be primed, and you'll probably find that you need to be a bit more careful when taking off the charcoal, because you can accidentally remove your drawing if you haven't pressed hard enough with a charcoal pencil. Then we're ready to paint. So let's get everything out. Right, so I've poured out my paints. I've got my brush here with some clean water, and I've got a few other brushes, and I also have a tissue. With the paints, I'll just go through the colours so that you know which colours I'm using for different areas and which colours I'm mixing up. I've got black, white, and that's Mars black before anyone asks me. White is titanium, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, cadmium red, crimson red. Okay, a lot of this, if you look at the reference image, is about blues and oranges, and also some greys. So with the oranges, it's nice and easy. Generally it's going to be cadmium mixes. It's quite a warm orange. The blue is going to be a bit more harder, that's more your cerulean, but also it's got that kind of greeny blue, turquoise. If you mix the cerulean with a lemon yellow, you will get quite a nice turquoise. With the greys, I'm going to probably keep those a little bit more lilac-y pinky from my printout, and that's why I've got the crimson red and white, because I can make a pinkiness from that. I can also mix the crimson red with an ultramarine blue and get a nice lilac-y tone from that, and add that in with the black to give myself some options there. I am going to be using black, neat, just to go around my lines and keep it a little bit crisp. Like I said with the drawing, how you paint is exactly the same. It's completely subjective. There's no specific way of working with something like this. Sometimes in abstracts you work on planes of depth, but because we've just got one object in this type of artwork, we don't so much have the planes of depth. The only plane of depth you'll probably have is the darkness of this wing, which makes it recess underneath the animal. So as long as you go dark under there, you can kind of get away with all manner of things. Now the wisest way to work with something like this is two things. First of all, work light to dark, so put down your lightest colours first, and then work up towards your darks. The second is deciding on a direction of brush mark you want. Now, this is when things start getting exciting. If you look at art history like Van Gogh, you can see how he's got very organic, curvaceous brush marks in his work. If you look at someone like Monet, he's got these lovely flicks, a lot like Renoir's type of work. You can, with modern work, because of modernism with Mondrian, he went very flat. We could do this in flat segments. There's absolutely a huge range of options to take, and usually students find that is the hardest thing when dealing with painting, having options. If things are nice and simple and straightforward, you can just kind of get on with it. As soon as you have to make a decision, then you start self-doubting, and things can go horribly wrong. With this, if you are on that self-doubt and you're new to it and you want to take it simply, I would look at kind of patchworking in flat areas of colour, a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle. If you feel like you want to do more kind of elaborate brush mark, feel free, have a go for it, okay? Experiment. With humans, we like curves and organic forms, so curvaceous brush marks normally play quite well on the human like in art. Does that make sense? Probably really poor English. How we like things. We like the curves. We're drawn much more to curves than we are straight lines. So, after that ramble what I've just put you through, let's get on and start doing some painting. So choose the brush for the size that you want to cover. The bigger the brush, the larger the area you're covering. Also, a pointed head brush is going to give you more accurate interval areas of detail, where a flat head brush is going to give you nice even coverage. I am working on a stay wet palette, and because I'm working on the stay wet palette, I'm not too phased about using a slow dry medium. However, if you do decide that you want to take a tone up and down in a small area, you might find that you do need to use a little bit of slow dry medium. It's kind of one of those you're going to need to play around and find out what works for you. Now, working on the light to dark, first of all I'm going to grab a little bit of white because I'm looking at the lightest parts. on the body. So let's look at bringing in some white here. Remember, it's abstract, so try and keep it simple. Don't get too bogged down in detail. Also, because this is acrylics, it does mean that you can paint over areas, so it doesn't matter if you overwork it. So I'm going to start using my brush to get a few splodges because it's quite dotty up here, and I like that dottiness. I'm not going to kind of go to the level of dottiness that I can see in the reference image, but I've got a little bit of a kind of dotting coverage. Okay. Then I've got a little bit of highlight on these wings, so let's just throw these in here. Okay, so that's my lightest point. Then I need to start working up. Now with this I feel like going into the orange. You could, if you want to, do like the silvery greys. Wash your brush. Make sure that you get all your paint off it, or you'll get cross-contamination. And then mix in your orange. Let's take in a little bit of cadmiums. I'm going to add a little bit of white to that to lighten it up. It's called tinting. And I'm going to start popping that into my bird design. Try and keep your paint fairly thick and even. And try and lay down like as much as you can in one brush mark, so you don't fiddle. Okay, clean out our brush. Now can you see how dirty my water's got? That needs to be cleaned or it's going to cause cross-contamination with other colours. So I'm going to just get some clean water and then I'll carry on with the next shade. Let's put in some nice gentle turquoise colours. So you can see how I'm mixing in a little bit of lemon yellow into a cerulean blue and getting a slight bluey grey. Now you do have to get the balance correct for this to be right, so just try and play around with it. It's about getting the right amount of blue so it doesn't look too green, it looks slightly more blue. Okay, then because I'm working light to dark, remember, I'm going to add in a little bit of white and tint it so that it's a little bit lighter. Now as soon as I do that, can you see how green that looks? That's not a problem. What we'll do is just add in a little bit more of the blue. Keep your eye on the reference image and mix until you think the shade looks pretty good as a match. Let's see how that looks. I can see how much paint I've got at the end of that brush. That's not a good idea, so I need to take off that excess paint. Just try and have it a little bit more on my tip so that I can control it. If you want to, you could change your brush. If you make it more of a pointed head, you'll get a slightly different type of brush mark that I'm getting. Please do experiment and find what you like. Don't copy me. And you can also take other colours and take it up and down. So you might find that you want to throw in a little bit more of a even more tinted turquoise on certain patches. So you've just got the same colour that you're lightening. So you can see how the flat brush is great for giving me quite a line brush stroke. You can just slide it in on the side and get quite a quick brush mark that's very straight. Okay, now let's play on with some blues. So, get a little bit of cobalt. Now that looks a bit harsh to me. I reckon if I get a little bit of the cerulean that I was using with the grain, for my grain, it'll create a nice halfway house blue. It's different from cerulean, but not as harsh as the cobalt. Let's have a look, see how that looks. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Could lighten it, a little bit of white in certain areas, just to soften it down, because it's quite a busy picture. Okay, so Kingfisher's starting to come together. Very bare bones at this stage, but it's starting to come together. Let's put in some of that grey. So, obviously, use a little bit of white with some black to make a grey tone. Now, like I said, I'm going to add in a little bit of purple. So I'm using my ultramarine blue and my crimson to make a lilac. The more red, the more plum it's going to go, the more blue, the more lilac-y shade it'll go. So it's about getting the proportions correct. Then once you've made that up, I'm going to add in just a little bit to make my grey lilac-y. Then I'm going to bring some of that in on a few areas where you're getting more of that grey shadowy tone working up. Right, can you remember how I was saying about planes of depth within abstract pictures? Okay, so here you can see that this wing actually is disappearing because it's all the even kind of tonal nature. It needs to be darker, okay, to throw this behind this front wing. So I'm just getting in some very dark grey and I'm putting that in, and that will knock back that wing and it will appear as if it's flying behind the other wing, just because it's dark. That's all it is. It's amazing how humans read depth. So can you see how that looks now, just like it's sitting behind? I'm going to put that foot in there. I'm going to put in a little bit of darker shadow in a few other places. So let's get that eye in. Now I've got two eyes going here, so I'm going to have one sitting there and then one there because of the movement. It's fractured. And I've also got two beaks. Let's add a little bit of water into that paint because just need a bit thinner to get to the edge of that beak. Alright, I'm going to put some little soft grey dots up here, so let's just lighten this down. Okay, we've got our bare boned bird with our basic colour range. Now, before I do any black, I'm going to go around and put in a background. This means obviously a much bigger brush because I've got quite a big area to cover. So let's upsize our brush and decide on a background colour. I'm probably wise keeping it to the same kind of tone that we've got here. So a nice green that looks quite natural. You get cadmium yellow and a little bit of cobalt blue. Now, as I'm working in acrylics, it's quite a thick paint. Probably going to need a little bit of water just to dilute this down. You'll also have to remember the area coverage that you've got to get. It's wise to mix too much paint, and I don't think I'm going to have enough there, so I'm going to mix in a little bit more. Right, so I filled in the background and I'm just going to let it dry, and then I'm going to come back in and reignite the drawing that holds it all together, give it some structure with some linear work. Let's just give that 10 minutes and I'll be back and we'll finish it off. See you in a moment. Okay, so my background has dried off and I'm just going to start working in some lines because I need to build up some structure. At the moment it's a little bit lost with all the different coloured brush marks. Now you could do this with bringing in darker shades, or you can use black just like I'm doing and working the drawing back in that we initially had in that early stage. Now remember that you don't want to lean on it, so you might find that you want to work from one side to the other. As I'm right-handed, I'm going to work that way. If you're left-handed, you probably want to do it in reverse. Do keep your brush strokes quite long and fluid and a bit broken to build up some of that texture, okay? And go over colours. Don't be worried about going over colours. You can see I'm going over now. Do use a finish brush so it gives you control. So I've added in a little bit of water into my paint just to give me a little bit more of an easier flow. And I'm going to start building up my bird feathers. Right, well there you go. That is just a quick summary of how to abstract a bird. It's a very gentle abstraction. It's not a kind of a really intense one. You could make it far more intense. You can see how you can build it up and you can play with the technique to get different styles that you like. But yeah, have some fun, see where it leads you. Be prepared to go with it and trust your instincts. The more you trust your instincts, usually the more it pays off with this type of painting. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week, everyone. Bye!